Hello, everyone, and as it was announced, I'm here to tell you the secret. First, a bit about myself. I'm currently the head of engineering at Vinted. I also lead Vilnius Tech Leads meetup group. Have ever of you attended it? Too few, too few. If you're interested in Agile Tour, you will probably find a topic that would be interesting for you at Vilnius Tech Leads too. In the past, I've also co-founded the Vilnius JS meetup group, but that one is in much better hands now. Before I was the head of engineering, I used to write code, and that includes writing open source. The open source project I'm most proud of is Pronto. You can find it at github.com/prontolabs/pronto. That project is also in much better hands than mine now. And the reason that I'm most proud of it is the fact that there are so many contributors contributing to this project. If you want to find me on the web, for example, if you're bored during this talk and you want something to read, you can find me at codingfearlessly.com or on Twitter, GitHub, and other platforms as MOZØRAS. One other thing you have to know about me that's actually relevant to this talk is the fact that I love basketball. I think that's not surprising in Lithuania, as many Lithuanians really enjoy the game of basketball to watch or to play. And this particular photo is of Kauno Žalgiris winning the EuroLeague in 1999, which is a fond memory I have from my childhood. I watched that season, the previous season, Kauno Žalgiris beating everyone. That was a lot of fun. One other thing that's also relevant to this talk that you have to know about me is that I love to read. And since I love basketball and I like to read books about basketball. The list of books I read about basketball includes these 6 ones, and one of these is very relevant to today's talk. That book is The Book of Basketball by Bill Simmons. In the Book of Basketball, Bill Simmons chronicles the history of the NBA, its greatest players, best teams, and he also reveals the secret. And the secret of basketball is that it's not about basketball. I will repeat because it might sound quite cryptic at first. The secret of basketball is that it's not about basketball. And this is the secret that this talk is about today. The talk itself is divided into 2 parts. The first part is Wilt versus Bill. The second part is individuals versus teams. And during this talk, I will talk about this rivalry between Wilt and Bill. And I will also talk about how that pertains to software development and how we have a Bill-inspired culture at Vinted. So, first part, Wilt versus Bill. On the left, in the blue jersey, you can see Wilt Chamberlain, and on the right, in the white and green jersey, Bill Russell. They were 2 of National Basketball Association's, or the NBA's, great players. Their rivalry defined the age they played in, and even today they're seen as 2 of the greatest to ever play this game. And let's start with Wilt. Let's talk a bit about Wilt. Wilt was seen as a great athlete from a very young age. In the 4th grade, everyone was already foreseeing a great career in sports for him. That it evolved to be true. In college, he was partaking in various sports, and he excelled in many of them. He could run really fast. He could run a quarter mile in 47 seconds, with the world record being 43. He could jump really high. He could throw the ball, the metal ball, really far. So it was not really a question if Wilt Chamberlain will excel at any sport, but which sport he will choose. And probably because he was so tall, he chose basketball. And in his first ever professional game, he scored 43 points and grabbed 28 rebounds. For comparison, no one ever comes close to these numbers in their first ever NBA game. The second highest is 31 points by Isaiah Thomas. And he grabbed quite a few less rebounds in that game. And it was not just his single game dominance, that dominance continued. So during his first season, Wilt Chamberlain was named both the Rookie of the Year, that means the best first-year player. He was also named the league's MVP, the league's most valuable player, the best player in his first season. And if you ever saw a photo of Wilt before this presentation, this is probably the photo you've seen. This is Wilt holding up a sign with 100, and it's not how much he scored on a math quiz, it's how many points he scored in a single game. For comparison, in the Final Four, where Kauno Žalgiris played and won the EuroLeague, no one team scored 100 points in a single game. And looking at the league's history, no one else also comes close to this single game dominance. Wilt owns the top 5 of the 7 spots for single game points. And Wilt was actually not only dominant in scoring, he was dominant in other things, in rebounding and other statistics. So there actually exists a term, non-Wilt record, which means that when Kobe Bryant scored 81 points, everyone was celebrating him for reaching the non-Wilt record. Because Wilt Chamberlain owns so many records and they seem so unassailable that people think in terms of, yes, you reached the non-Wilt record. Congrats, you're the best possible, except for this guy Wilt, which we will not have to discuss. And his scoring dominance extended not only to single games but also to seasons. Over the whole season, he managed to average, for example, 50 points, and he owns the top 4 spots ever, with some guy named Michael Jordan being in the 5th spot with measly 37 points. And I could talk about how dominant Wilt was as a basketball player. There were rule changes implemented because of his dominance. He would challenge opposing players and tell them, you will not score today, and proceed to implement just that. One season, because he was critiqued for not sharing the ball with other players enough, he decided that I will average the highest number of assists. I think we're still okay. I will average the highest number of assists in the league. And he proceeded to do just that. Like, he averaged the highest number of assists in the league. He could do anything he wanted on a basketball court. Now let's talk about something that's, I think, that you will see, I hope soon, as related to Wilt. Let's talk about 10x engineers, this other mythical creature. I've seen this. I saw this Twitter thread a couple of months ago, in which a founder, I will probably mispronounce his name, Shakar Kirani, explains to his audience that if you find a 10x engineer, that 10x engineer will make your whole company so successful that you just have to grab onto him and don't let go. And he sees it as a challenge. Okay, the biggest challenge is actually to identify those 10x engineers. And he proceeds, well, this is not the whole Twitter thread, but he proceeds to list the things that, the ways in which you could identify these 10x engineers. And the things that he names are like, they are the people who do it all themselves, who produce great amounts of code, who have tremendous memory and can recall documentation just by that. They produce code really fast, and well, they know everything about the system that they're working on that there is to know. And to me, that's similar to how we just evaluated Wilt. Wilt was so singular dominant, he produced so many statistics, he could do everything themselves. And looking at this description of a 10x engineer by this founder, I see quite a few similarities by how we, this is also someone, this mythical 10x engineer who can do everything themselves, produce great amounts of statistics, etc. And in the past, I've seen engineers who value these things, who value doing everything themselves. And I want to relate a quick story about that. So this is a comment from a code review on a pull request. This comment says, please use parentheses. Check out our style guide. Now, by itself, this comment is I would say, unharmful. It's okay. The problem with this particular comment is that there were like 30 very similar comments on the same code review, which is annoying to the person whose code is getting reviewed that way. Well, let's check out another comment from a different code review by the same engineer. This comment says, interesting indentation, dot. It sounds passive aggressive because it is. And I have one last comment for you. This is quite more direct. Screw this. I'm reviewing only pull requests from my team from now on. Very direct. This proclamation lasted less than 2 weeks. And I know that very well because that engineer was me. Since then, I've learned some valuable lessons about trusting other engineers and better ways to help them than this. Much better ways to help them than this. And now going back to Wilt, what's also relevant here is that Wilt, over his career, despite his singular dominance in statistics, despite the many records he holds, was always in conflict with his teammates, was often in conflict with his coaches, and valued his individual success over his team's success. And I would say that because of that, during his 15-year career, despite his ability to do anything he wanted on the basketball court, he managed to become the NBA champion only twice. Once when the other guy I'm going to talk about next was injured. And the other time, in his second to last season, when he was no longer far from most important player of the team, and this other guy in the background was actually leading the charge. So despite his individual dominance, he only managed to become a champion twice. Who was winning all those championships while Wilt was not? Let's talk about Bill Russell. Here's Bill. And what you have to know for this photo to make sense, maybe you know it, is that whenever you win an NBA championship, you get a ring. And as you can see here, Bill is wearing 2 rings on 1 finger. Then why is he doing that? That's definitely not in fashion. And he's doing that because he has 11 rings. He managed to become an NBA champion 11 times in the 13 seasons he played in the NBA, which is astonishing. Like, if there's a entry for winning in the dictionary, his face should be there. And unlike with Wilt, Bill was never seen as the best athlete, as someone who will, from the young age, will be great at sports. And when he got to the NBA, he felt just lucky to be here. He never took this opportunity for granted, and he primarily focused on his team, on his teammates, and making them successful and the team successful over his individual achievements. And unlike with Wilt, the mood in the Boston Celtics locker room was always jovial. The team had strong relationships with each other. There were no questions about conflict between Bill and the coaching staff. And I believe that because the Boston Celtics managed to focus on their team success, because they were friendly with each other, because statistics came secondary to winning, because of that, Wilt did manage to beat Bill in every category, but Bill managed to beat Will in the most important one, and that's winning. And going back to 10x engineers, I believe that the list I showed you previously on how to identify a 10x engineer is not the best one. And I will not be able to give you a perfect list now, but I think this comes much, much closer to a list on how to identify a 10x engineer than the list suggested by the founder in that Twitter thread. So I believe that a great engineer is someone who helps others, who challenges you in the right way, who's pragmatic, who values simplicity, and who understands their limit. And the reason I'm using basketball to talk about software development is, well, besides the fact that I love basketball, this is just fun to talk about basketball in front of all this audience. The other reason is that it's easier to measure success in basketball. In basketball, you either win or you lose. You either win this season, you play second, or whatever. With software development teams, it can become much harder. So I think that this comparison is useful to help us identify which individuals help make our team successful, and which individuals don't. And now I would like to go into the second part of the presentation. And this part is called individuals versus teams. And when I talked about what made Bills teams and Boston Celtics successful, I was talking about culture, really. A culture of valuing team success and relationships over some other things. So the second part of the presentation will be a lot about culture. Because of this Agile tour, I have to have this slide. It's written in the contract, and I just want to make one quick note before I dive into culture. The first line of the manifesto says individuals and interactions over processes and tools. If I could change one thing in the manifesto, I would find a way to put teams on it somewhere, maybe in the first line. And the same goes for the modern Agile principles. Make people awesome. Maybe there could be something about teams there as well. Now, we can't really change the manifesto or the modern Agile principles. So let's talk about something we can change, and that's culture in our teams and in our companies. You've probably heard of this quote: "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." This is a quote by Peter Drucker, and this quote is not meant as, strategy is unimportant and culture is everything that's important. It's meant as if you want to implement a strategy, you want to have strong cultural support for that strategy. And as Peter Drucker, I don't believe that culture trumps everything, but I do believe that culture is very important. And I want to talk specifically about a couple of things a couple of things that we have at Vinted that are about culture. I won't go through our whole culture description. I will just pick out a couple of things that I think are very relevant to what I've talked about in the first part and talk about those. One thing that we value at Vinted is collaboration. We believe that collaboration is trumps competition. That means that we also value team success over individual success. And it also means that we help each other whenever we can. So this is something that we value. And like any value, it comes with trade-offs. If your companies, your teams also have certain cultures, and those also come with trade-offs. There is no perfect culture, and I'm not implying in any way that we at Vinted have a perfect culture. We have a culture that we believe makes us successful and works for our context, but as with any culture, there are trade-offs and there are negatives to it. So for example, by valuing collaboration so highly, we end up in situations where people actually spend a lot of time aligning and agreeing on something before they move to actually doing something. So maybe in another company, it could be that you have an idea, make a decision, tell the decision to everyone, and you just go. That would not work at Vinted. You would try doing that, and you would get a ton of pushback and no one moving with you and just saying, no, 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 stop. Where are you going? No. It would simply not work in our culture. So building alignment at Vinted takes time. But after you build that alignment, then everyone moves with you, and we then start moving really fast. And what I believe is that by remaining consistent with our culture, even if it hurts, we are optimizing globally while making some sacrifices locally. So we're optimizing our culture overall, and we're keeping our culture code throughout the whole company. But that means that on a more local level, we're making some sacrifices where people need to move maybe a bit slower at first. And this is actually a quote by Bill Russell: even if it hurts, remain consistent. Right. And one other thing we value at Vinted, which is also quite similar to what I believe Boston Celtics, Bill Russell's Boston Celtics valued, are our relationships. We believe that our colleagues are our friends. We help each other, and we help each other not just with work stuff, we help each other with personal stuff. We had many maybe too strong of a word, multiple situations where someone on our team had a personal problem, and then some of their colleagues would jump in and help them with that problem. Like, for example, even taking care of their kids for a couple of days. And this kind of culture that values relationships also comes with downsides, because, again, this is also a quote by Bill Russell: friendships take a lot of work. We take time to build those relationships in our work, time that could be used to do something else, actually doing some kind of work. And for example, we have an internal message board in which people occasionally post personal stuff, like even personal problems they're experiencing. And there are situations when the whole company's attention is captured by that problem that's not in any way directly related to our mission, to the company mission. And and that's a trade-off we understand. We take this trade-off intentionally, and we're not planning to change this culture, because we believe that despite these negative sides to our values, these values help make us successful. So, and these values that I just talked about, I believe, are quite similar to the values the Bill Russell Celtics also had. Now, having these values is not enough, so we connect these cultural values with growth. So we have a career ladder for engineering, and here's part of it. At the top, you can see engineer 1, engineer 2, the levels that we have. And in this ladder, we have not only technical skills we expect from our team, but also skills, for example, around collaboration. Oopsie daisy. So, for example, we expect from an engineer 3 level person, that's just one example, to approach disagreement with curiosity, empathy, humility, and a goal of a stronger solution. So as an engineer tree, at engineer tree level, which is equivalent, kind of equivalent to what's a senior engineer at some other companies, that's a requirement for you. And for example, to become an engineering lead, you have to build. To be at the engineering lead 2 level, you have to build an atmosphere where your team communicates openly with each other without fear. So it's not just about, for engineers, it's not just about technical skills. For leads, it's not just about maintaining a certain process, but we expect, because our culture is around collaboration, we expect people to also have to do certain things around collaboration in their work. During the last couple of years, Vinted has experienced a lot of growth. So our team grew really, really fast. For example, engineering grew from 30 people to 105 in the last 2 years. And that put a lot of pressure on our culture, because you have a lot of new people coming in and if you go from 30 to 105, 75 of those people might not be that very well familiar with our culture. And our culture could just be gone after hiring so much. So there were specific things we did to safeguard our culture. For example, when building new teams, we would not build new teams from zero. We would build an existing well-functioning team into double size, and then split that team up into 2 teams. And we would split that team up by as equally as we could. That means that both teams should be more or less equally senior. Both teams should be more or less equally tenured. So tenured meaning that spent time at Vinted, being familiar with our culture. And for example, the lead in one team and the product owner in the other in the same team should not be both new to the company. So that's one way we tried not to lose culture. One other thing we do at Vinted is when we hire, one of the steps that we have is a tryout. So we check the technical skills with an engineer, and then as the last step, you have to go to a tryout at Vinted. And a tryout is a 1 or 2 day. You go in and spend 1 or 2 days with the team at Vinted. And this part is not about your technical skills. This is purely about how you collaborate with others, how you work with others, how well do you match our culture, etc. And we had situations where we had really technically skilled engineers ace their technical interviews, and then we would not give them offers after the tryout. And primarily because we believe that culture is very important, and we would not like to lose our culture. That's what we do to set a culture. We do also some other things, but that's what we do to set a culture around team success and not individual success. We start with culture and build around tools and processes around that culture to support that culture. One of the tools being the career ladder, but there are some other ones. And now going back to the secret, Well, the secret of basketball, I said at the beginning of this presentation, is that the secret of basketball is that it's not about basketball. And I also believe that the secret of code is that it's not about code. It's about it's about valuing team success. It's about working well with your teammates, just purely liking each other. And it's definitely not about your personal productivity, but about what you can do together to achieve your goal. So if you're an engineer and you want to become a 10x engineer, I would suggest to first think about what you can do to make your team successful instead of what you can do to make yourself individually successful. And if you lead teams or even companies, I would suggest to think about the culture you set at your company or team and the tools that you use to keep that culture or strengthen that culture. And if you don't believe me, well, those rings don't lie. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? Just raise your hand. Yeah.
Hello. I have a question. You previously mentioned that you give newcomers a couple of days of like a temporary join with team, right? If I understand correctly.
Okay.
Trial day.
Yeah. I will clarify. That's a part of hiring before giving an offer. Yeah.
So I believe most of the people joining new team, they are not. They tend to be shyer than normally, and then not show who they are. Let's say that. So what kind of criteria you use to understand if people could join the team?
Absolutely, and I think that's especially true for engineers. Like most engineers are not extroverted, let's say. We are not focused when evaluating. We are not focused on that someone would, be extroverted and interact a lot with their teammates. We're focused. So during those 2 days, most of the time it's 2 days, we give a simple task to the engineer, and we explain what we expect, because I think it's very important to set expectations. We expect collaboration, asking questions, and we evaluate that. So it's problematic if the engineer during tryout does not, tries to do everything themselves, for example, and does not interact with their teammates and does not ask questions. Well, that's a simple example. And we try to be very clear that that's something we expect, and if we don't see that, we give feedback that that's something we expect, etc.
More questions? So, okay, we have a few questions on Menti. The first one is, why aren't you employing people?
Very curious to hear the end of that
Why
question.
aren't you employing people that may seem to have different values that would challenge your culture? And do you believe that culture should also improve with new people bringing in new ideas?
Mm-hmm. Okay, we do not. It's not that we never hire people who have who would bring different culture to Vinted. We do, but that is something that we make a conscious choice of. There are things that we see as non-negotiable at this point with our culture, and there are things that we want to change, of course. Like, we don't believe that our culture is perfect and that our culture will work when we grow 3 more times. maybe then we will need to change our culture in some way. But we try to be very conscious of that and make that into a conscious decision.
Okay, thanks. Another question. So who will the company hire to develop an app externally? A team of 3 Wilts or 10 Isaiah Thomases?
What was the end of that question?
A team of 3 Wilts or 10 Isaiah Thomases?
I don't know how to answer that. Well, yeah, I don't know how to begin answering that question. But when we do evaluate external companies to do work for us, it's not as important that the culture would match exactly, but there are still things we expect from the third party culturally to at least match in some way. Regarding 3 Wills, 10 Isaiah Thomases, 10 Isaiah Thomases, I would say. But yeah, it's a very interesting question, which I think requires deeper discussion.
Okay, so one more question. Can you have cultural values within the team that do conflict with values that organization as a whole has?
So we consciously make a choice that we optimize globally, and we try to have a company culture and not this team's culture, this team's culture, this team's culture, this team's culture. So ideally, no, but nothing's perfect, and obviously not. Even if we have a certain company culture, every team is still slightly different.